Here we see the end of Ahab. A very interesting set of circumstances here. First off, you need to remember that Ahab is the king of the northern 10 tribes. And his area where he is living is now called Samaria. And Jehoshaphat is the king of the southern 2 tribes, basically Judah and Benjamin. And for some reason, Jehoshaphat goes north to meet the king of Israel. In the very first times we were talking about it, Israel was all 12 tribes, but now Israel is considered just the northern 10 tribes, not everybody. And Ahab is the king still of Israel, and he says to Jehoshaphat, "Do you not realize that Ramoth in Gilead is ours for the taking if we want it from the king of Syria? And we're sitting here and we're not going to go get this." And that is not just a city, that's an area which is considered to be very fertile, was considered in those days to be very fertile, very good place, some place that was worthwhile acquiring, some place they could get some taxes out of. And Ahab says to Jehoshaphat, "Will you go with me to get it?" And Jehoshaphat says, "Sure. Yeah, your guys are my guys are your guys. Let's go get them." But he said, "Have you got a prophet that we can talk to about what sort of things, what we should do?" And Ahab says, "Boy, have I got prophets. You just wait till you see this." And he calls up 400 of his, quote, prophets of Baal, the priests of Baal. And these guys say, "Oh, it's wonderful. Yes, sirree. You just go get that Ramoth Gilead, Ahab, and God's in your favor, and everything will be absolutely wonderful." And Jehoshaphat takes a look at this and the sound of it, and he realizes something. These 400 guys have no clue what spirituality is, what the Lord wants to do. These guys are saying only what they think Ahab wants to hear. And so he asks again, "Have you got a prophet of the Lord that we can discuss this with or talk to about?" And Ahab knows exactly who Jehoshaphat is talking about. And he says, "Well, there is one of these guys around. His name is Micaiah. And I hate him because he always prophesies rotten things about me." And Jehoshaphat says, "Well, let's see what he has to say this time." So they send somebody to get Micaiah. And the guy that goes to get Micaiah says, "You know, all of the priests there are just saying pleasant things about the king. Why don't you just try doing that once? This time, right? See how it goes, right?" So Micaiah shows up in front of Jehoshaphat and Ahab. And Ahab they said, "Well, what do you have to say?" Oh, and he mocks them. He mocks them, something horrible. And said, "Oh, just go up and take it and everything will be perfectly fine." And then Ahab catches on that he's being mocked. And he says, "How many times do I have to tell you, adjure thee, which means warn thee, tell me, all the rest of it, tell me the absolute truth." And so Micaiah says, "I saw all the people without a leader. Everybody headed to their own tents." In other words, he saw that Ahab would be killed and the army would vanish from the field of battle, unvictorious. And Ahab turns to Jehoshaphat, "See what I tell you? Just everything's bad with this guy." And they put Micaiah in prison with the bread and water of affliction, which means on reduced rations, just enough, hopefully, to keep you from starving to death until I come back. And Micaiah says, "If you come back." So they go to the battle, and Ahab does something really dirty and underhanded, but Jehoshaphat doesn't catch on. What Ahab says to Jehoshaphat is, "You put on your robes, Okay, so you'll look like the king, and everybody will know you're the king. And I'll go into the battle, but I'll go into it disguised. That way I'll be able to fight. Well, that was the ultimate cowardice. Because Ahab got the 32 so-called kings that he had with him, who were guys who were captains of his chariots. And their job was to fight around him so that he would be protected. But because the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat, had on his royal robes, the enemy would think he was the king of Israel. And they would fight after him. And that's really what started to happen. And then they, at some point, when they got really close to him and they could have perhaps killed him, they realized he was not the king of Israel, but some archer took a shot just at a chance and actually hit Ahab. And he started to bleed, and by nightfall he had died. And the army just vanished and melted away. They took the chariot back to Samaria when they took the king back. And then they washed out the chariot of the pool of blood that had accumulated on the floor of the chariot. And as Elijah has said, the dogs licked up Ahab's blood from the spot where they had stoned Naboth. Sort of an interesting way for things to go. And then there are other things back and forth about Jehoshaphat and Ahab's son, and how they didn't work out a deal for going on the ships and things like that. There was a lot that happened and a lot that didn't happen, as these people had their pride and their personalities and other sorts of things that were influenced them to do certain things. And they were operating the ships and making deals as to how much money you would get and how much money I would get. And everything was for gain. And if they couldn't get a good deal, then they wouldn't do anything, and they wouldn't let anybody else get anything either. But now we're at the end of 1 Kings. We have seen that Ahab is dead and that the prophecy from Elijah was perfectly true and happened exactly as he said. And that we now have the opportunity to see other things happening in the second book of Kings. I almost forgot one of the most critical items that's in this chapter. And you need to understand the purpose of earth life is for every single individual who is born on this earth to come, gain a body, and be responsible for the decisions they make, because they have the right to choose what they're going to say and do under all circumstances. Heavenly Father never interferes with our right to make a choice, to tell people the truth, to lie, to do anything else, because to do that would totally violate the reason for us coming here and totally render it impossible to judge us on the basis of what we decided to do if he interfered with what we would think. And so, in the story where the 400 priests of Baal, in theory, had a lying spirit sent to them from God, that is a total fabrication. Because Heavenly Father does not work that way. Now, the Hebrew translation, properly done, may be estimated to include the thought that they may have been permitted to have a lying spirit about them, but that would have been their choice to listen to that, because that was what Baal worship involved, and Baal basically was a stand-in for Satan. And so that's where the lying spirit would have come from, not from the Lord. Never, 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 never from the Lord.